Zdrasite, my fair weather friends, and welcome back to another episode of Kachimuchi's Game and Spooks. With the recent closure of the Nintendo eShop, it got me thinking about how fragile a game collection can be. Sometimes, games you take for granted or assume will always be there, just suddenly one day without warning, won't be. You cannot imagine the heart attack I almost had when I heard PlayStation was doing something similar a couple years ago, with the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Vita. And indeed, you cannot imagine my relief when they announced that they wouldn't be shutting them down. For now. In the case of Nintendo, and perhaps PlayStation, games that are exclusively released on the online services may not ever be accessible again once those services shut down. Fortunately, however, much of the internet was able to rescue many of the Java-based browser games released in the mid-2000s, which I am eternally grateful for. You cannot imagine the hundreds of hours I spent playing games like Shopping Cart Hero, Ricochet Kills, Crush the Castle, Gibbets, The Torture Game, and many, many more. A tear often forms in my eye when I imagine all those browser-based games that weren't saved when Java became unsupported. Make no mistake, digital book burning is a very real thing. Just ask the Deadpool game or the playable teaser. That said, this creepypasta is based around a browser-based game, and the, perhaps, true reason as to why it shut down. And considering the game could never be accessed again, there's nothing to say that this creepypasta couldn't be real. And so, without any further ado, let us begin Glitch, Final Days, by Kefka Ren, who I also found out was the author of Heartbreak Hotel and Unknown Format, so credit to those stories as well. Okay, now let's begin. I'm writing this while I still remember, because once I'm done, I plan to do whatever it takes to make myself forget it again. Some of you may remember Glitch, a game by a company called Tiny Speck. Those of you who do probably played it and remember it fondly, while those who don't may not ever have heard of it at all. For the uninitiated, I'll try to explain. Glitch was different. It had chibi characters and an aspect of customizable avatars, but that wasn't the main focus. It gave each player their own personal dream bubble that they could put whatever they wanted in, and decorate a personal house. That wasn't the focus either, but neither was crafting items, growing plants, massaging butterflies, nibbling piggies, or squeezing chickens, although all those things were present. What Glitch was is something that was printed on the very tin, a game of giant imagination. It was a very social game, and even what passed for combat required gathering a group together. Everything had this moon logic to it that was really charming, in a glorified Facebook app sort of way, all revolving around shaping a world that wasn't quite real with the power of your imagination. It had quite a cult following. Then, in early December of 2012, the game was ended and shut down. The announcement was sudden, and the excuses given were not very satisfying. According to an official statement, quote, "If there was a way to make it work, we would make it work. But there is not. We've been through this from all angles, over and over and over. We've shed tears, and we will probably shed some more. But Glitch is over." Unquote. They claimed that there just wasn't enough interest in the game. It was an odd claim to make. Tiny Speck had never really done much to promote the game, and from those I talked to, people pretty much only heard about it by word of mouth. Even the business model seemed designed to be discouraging, though that could just be my personal bias talking. I have a reason to believe it, though. I have a big reason. I have the reason. I know why Glitch really shut down. Even though I only started playing Glitch during the last few months it was online, it always felt really, well, beta. There were odd glitches, appropriately enough, and things that didn't quite seem to be finished. At first, I just figured it was part of the game. With the announcement that they were shutting things down, though, it started to seem fishy to me. I had always enjoyed looking for the bugs and unfinished things. With the game's closure looming, though, I didn't have much time left, and really started looking into those things with a vengeance. I was just hoping that something in the game would give me a reason. Like, deep down it was broken in some way that they just didn't want to admit. I thought that anything would be better than having to admit that a game so amazing was just not what people wanted. I was obsessed. But maybe that's what saved me. For instance, I never got into Solus. You won't find much information on it if you go looking, and that's probably for the best. Even what little I've pieced together from talking to people doesn't paint a pretty picture. There's still screenshots out there, though, because, as you would expect, a mysterious special area in an online game became a popular place to visit. It was a hellish area that showed up towards the end. For the most part, it was just empty. While most areas in the game were full of things to interact with and resources to gather, Solus had nothing. No trees, no creatures, no rocks to mine, or any of the other things that would have usually been in an area. It was just an empty area. Some people claim to have seen a single tombstone in the area, which doesn't seem to be placed in any consistent location. In fact, I've never found even a single screenshot of the quote-unquote tombstone. I believe it, though. Most people only went there now and then, or as part of a group. But I talked to a few who knew people who'd become obsessed with the place. Never the people themselves, though. Not even when I could get their contact info. Something in Solus changed them, and trying to get them to talk about it, even with their closest friends. Suffice to say, they reacted poorly. That's why I say that I'm lucky. I was so busy looking for hidden things that I totally missed the one thing everyone knew about. And it's pretty obvious that I'm just the type of person that would have found whatever left those other people so broken. For the entire month of November, I was looking over all the information I could find, looking for some reason that tiny speck wasn't telling us for why they'd want to close. I think that I've already mentioned that I was unlucky, and determined enough to find it. Of course, there were clues in the game. You could even say that the game was nothing but clues. What really opened it up for me, though, was an old post on Twitter by one of the devs, since removed from his account. He mentioned that the number of giants, the gods but we aren't calling them gods so we don't offend people, of the glitch universe, was something carefully chosen. According to the tweet, the dev team always knew that they wanted the number to be prime, and something that would, quote-unquote, feel meaningful to most players. Now, in Glitch, there are, or rather were, 11 giants, each with domain over a different aspect. So, like I said, gods. The thing is, 11 isn't a very meaningful number to most people. Suddenly, I had something to work with. One of the big things in Glitch was hints from various NPCs that the history of the game's world is a lie. I'd thought it was a very clever nod to the fourth wall, but now I had something to work off of. I started with the assumption that there weren't 11 giants, and worked from there. If there weren't 11, then there had to be more or less. So I started looking at what was in the game, and if there was any obvious things that hinted to a giant not existing, or of something that was there with no giant related. Yes, I found what I was looking for. The harder I looked, the easier it was to find. There were a lot of references in the lore to the incarnations of Glitch that had come before, little areas with things that were obviously relics of prior builds. I remember the area that I went to, that proved my suspicions vividly. It was just called an old place, and didn't seem like too much to look at. It was a forest clearing with big dark trees, and shrubs and brambles in the background. The area itself involved a puzzle where you had to use light sources to build paths of shadow to get around the briar bushes. The mechanics weren't as polished as other puzzles, and the nagging message that would ask if you needed to leave didn't pop out. It stood out because the messages were usually obnoxiously persistent. The puzzle itself wasn't much of anything, though. What caught my attention was just a background object, something you couldn't even interact with. It looked like one of the shrines to the giants, only cracked and dirty, and covered in brambles. Maybe not exactly, it looked like a less polished design, but the intent was obvious. It fascinated me, and I worked with the lights to study it in as much detail as I could. Each of the giants has a symbol that appears on their shrines, little cave painting style pictographs to tell them apart. The ones in An Old Place look like it had a bird on it, which is not a symbol associated with any of the giants. However, there is a significance to birds in Glitch, specifically the rook, crow-like enemies that spread death and destruction in their wake. Rook will even break the fourth wall and leave a broken monitor decal on your UI. Game lore had it that the rook were intelligent and malicious, with mysterious motives. They, and everything to do with them, almost felt out of place in the otherwise saccharine world that Tiny Speck had created. Well, maybe not that out of place, after all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At the time, seeing the bird mark on the shrine didn't fill me with a hollow sense of impending doom. It was exciting, a discovery. I couldn't wait to find more, because even if it ended up having nothing to do with the site shutting down, I'd wind up with a great story that no one else knew. Had there been a god, or giant of evil? At the time, that sounded like the coolest thing ever. I never bothered with taking the snapshottery perk. No, seriously, screenshots were an in-game ability, so I had to get more creative to take screenshots. Okay, really, I just opened something else so that Firefox was in the background and hit print screen. But I thought I was pretty clever. There was an obvious question, though. Because 12 wasn't prime, there had to be another giant to make it a prime number. I wondered, if the 12th giant's domain was the Rook and their destructive world, what would a 13th giant possibly represent? I no longer even cared if it had anything to do with the game being cancelled. This was way more interesting than some maybe not real super glitch or politically incorrect elements hidden in the game that could get them into legal trouble. But oh, how I wish that my more frivolous fangirl speculations had been right. The sad thing is, ignorance really is bliss. If I'd known even an inkling of what I was going to find, of what it all meant, I don't think anything could have saved me. Actually, I'll get back to that. For now, just know that it got worse. Much worse. I was losing sleep trying to get in all the time I could. Sometimes I'd talk to people trying to be sneaky because I didn't want to share my big discovery. I'd follow up on rumors and stories about weird, hard-to-find parts of the game and try to study them as much as I could. A lot of it was nothing. Some were quirky, but normal. One I realized pretty quickly was just a phishing scam, but there were a handful that lead to things that really seemed out of place. There was an area with a name card that showed no text and had what looked like a player house, but so far as I could tell it was a public street and had no owner. I found a minigame that involved shuffling rock skulls, like the ones from the Rock Cemetery area, in giant scales. One spot featured an inky void that you swam through like a water level, lit only by the glow that came from those, for lack of a better description, long, ragged tears in the blackness. That reddish-purple light poured through, and a dim glow around my glitch. The one that was perhaps the worst was a room called Sacrifice. It was another dark room, lit so only the thing you were supposed to see could be seen. It was a broken shrine, like the one from An Old Place, though not the same one. At regular intervals, a phantom glitch, the one from one of the quests, would go up to the shrine. It would seem to speak for a moment, then do its give heart animation. The heart would fall towards the shrine, which acted like it was receiving a donation, even though you couldn't interact with it yourself. This may sound weird, but the phantom glitch seemed to fit more in the sacrifice room than it did in the quest, where it was normally supposed to be. I must have taken dozens of screenshots, each labeled carefully and stored on a flash drive for safekeeping. I've deleted them all now, trying to erase what happened, but there was a lot of them once. It was easy to know what to take pictures of because there were two things that set these areas apart. The first thing was the music. It had a soft, thudding backbeat, like a heart. Not a calm heart, though. To me, it always sounded like the heartbeat of someone who was just a little bit afraid and trying to hide it. The music that played over top of it was unnerving, but not in the same way as the deliberately eerie tracks that you'd hear from the abandoned building, or the open menace of the level that played for a rook attack. It actually sounded more like the track you would hear for the Ancestral Lands, only it was slowed, put into a major key, and played on something I couldn't identify. It's hard to explain with words, but you would have recognized it right away. The second thing, though, was by a symbol that each of the rooms had. It was on the scales in the rook room, it was on the door of the house. It pulsed, shadowy, in some of the rips in the void. It was on the shrine in Sacrifice. It was a simple pictograph, like the ones for the giants and the rook one, but something unique. It looked like a web, or maybe more of a fractured cluster of rocks in between 3 dots. It didn't look threatening in the least, but I'd feel like my spine had just got brushed with ice water whenever I saw it. Finally, the last day came around. My last chance to learn the game's secrets. There was one thing I wanted to try, and I got an early start for it. I'd heard from a couple of people about a trick that involved messing with some of the game's behaviors to spawn things in you normally couldn't, in place of the game's prize wheel. It was one of those things that I'd been reluctant to try, because it could get you banned. However, I'd saved up my game show tickets so that I could try it out just before Tiny Speck pulled the plug. After all, what could they do? Ban me from a game I wouldn't be able to play? What a brilliant plan that was. The process was tricky and involved getting certain effects to trigger or end with the right timing so that the variables got shifted around when it tried to call up the prize spinner, and it grabbed another entity instead. To tell the truth, I didn't understand most of the explanation on why it worked myself. Even if I had, I wouldn't explain it here. Partially to protect people from trying to repeat what I did, but mostly just because the game servers don't exist anymore, so why bother? The point is that I spent a good part of the day playing with the glitch and figuring it out. Based on some things I read, I tried low variables first. Some items I called up were interesting, but not what I was looking for. I was running out of tickets and about to give up when, on a hunch, I decided to try high instead, figuring maybe they were trying to hide something that way. Maybe I got lucky, or maybe it was some kind of default value for when it couldn't find the object called. But that actually worked. Instead of the game show wheel, I had a shrine sitting in my house's backyard. It was cracked and worn-looking, and the model was more crude than the ones you normally see in the game. And it had the symbol on it, that spidery, cracking symbol that had been haunting me. I wasn't sure what to do, so I tried to interact with it. To my surprise, it worked, just like it was a real shrine. I swear my heart started beating a little faster. This was the first time I could interact directly with something related to the lost giants. I went pretty quick to get my Rook kit, the bag with supplies for making big donations to shrines. In the game, these shrines were used to fight as well as gain personal bonuses. I wanted to get my favor up with the mystery giant, and see if it would give me his or her emblem. If I could get that, it would be something no one else had. I wish I hadn't. You have no idea how much I wish I hadn't. I really, really wish that I hadn't. I'm sorry, I'm just stalling now. The sooner I finish this, the sooner I can forget this ever happened. Convince myself that I imagined the whole thing. That bottle of cheap schnapps is calling me. Everything I donated seemed to give less favor than it did with any other giant. I just couldn't seem to find things it would like. Even using my shrine powders to boost the results, it took way more than I expected. Even though the shrine worked, the messages didn't. Where it would say you gained X favor with giant, the name was just a bunch of garbage characters. Eventually, though, I did it. Oh boy, did I do it. Okay, I'm continuing this after a few drinks to calm my nerves. Forgive me if it's a little hard to read because of it. Whenever you completely fill the favor bar for a giant the first time, it gives a little cutscene. You get to see the face of the giant you won the favor of and read a bit about them. It did that for the mystery giant too. First, the music started playing, soft at first as the picture faded in, then louder. The volume kept increasing till the giant had appeared, but by then it was pretty loud. The face... I really don't want to talk about the face. I don't, but I gotta, but I don't. I dada. Okay, that's not as funny as I thought. Sorry. I'm stalling again. I delete this part, but just... fuck it, you know? Maybe you should stop reading here anyway. It'd be better that way. Yeah, I'm gonna assume that you didn't listen to me because I'm stupid and a little bit drunk, and I also need to finish this anyways. So, the face. The face of all the giants looked like nightmare fuel, just a bunch of friendly neighborhood horror terrors. This was worse. It wasn't that it was more realistic or in a different style. If anything, it looked unfinished. A crude, early design like the shrine. It was twisted, though. Where other giants are creepy in an almost charming way, this one was actually sickening to look at. If you can imagine death having a face, not the Grim Reaper skull, but like a face that looks like death, like rot and decay and vermin and all that, I think this thing would have grossed out that face. The eyes bulged and pulsed. 3 of them were on different parts of its face. Sometimes they'd flash colors, red and amber and violet and sickly green. Mostly they were just black-pupilled and bloodshot. The mouths, 3, 4, 6 of them, they twisted and snapped and snarled, showing snake-like fangs. But the inside of the mouth looked gooey and filled with something. Maybe bugs, bones, organs. I don't know, they weren't detailed enough. If anything, not knowing was worse. Things crawled along the face like centipedes but covered in spikes, and slithered all over these crooked antler spines, going in one mouth and out the other. The effect was sickening and hypnotic. I couldn't tear my eyes away even to move my hand to the volume control. I realized I could hear whispering voices over or under the music. I couldn't tell what they were saying, but it felt like something was squeezing and tugging at my heart. I remembered the sacrifice room. All of those ghosts offering up their hearts to the giant. This giant. A sweat broke out over my body, but I felt like I was freezing. My bones ached. I don't know how long I sat there, staring with frozen and just abject terror. Eventually, the voices started making sense. I could hear it talking about me. They were listing off my sins. Every time that I lied or cheated or took something from someone. If I'd gotten jealous of someone having something they deserved, the voices knew. If I had refused change to a hobo and then saved it for a year, they knew. They knew everything I ever did, and for each one they listed, I felt another pull at my heart, each a little harder than the last. The worst was when they got to the people I had rejected. A chant of names, reasons for everyone I'd been asked out on a date, and turned it down for superficial, shallow, or selfish reasons. The tugging was getting faster and faster. My heart hurt. I fell faint. I think I blacked out. When I came to, my speakers were quiet. I looked at the screen, and it showed an error message. I'd been disconnected. For a moment I just stared at it, uncomprehending, before looking at the clock, and starting to laugh. Disconnected? Of course I'd been disconnected. The whole game had been disconnected. I stood and threw my hands in the air, spinning in a fit of joy. There was a jolt of pain in my chest, and I collapsed. It terrified me at the time. The doctors tell me I have an unusual form of arrhythmia. I'd say I got off easy. but sometimes I still see that face when I look at a reflection or hear the music in my dreams. The end. And that was Glitch, Final Days, by Kefka Ren. This is a creepypasta very few people have heard of, namely because few people have heard of the game the creepypasta was based off of. I myself only really remembered it when I had heard that the Nintendo eShop was shutting down, and this creepypasta was also about a game that was getting shut down. Yes, this was indeed a real game that really was shut down around the time the creepypasta was made. And if you can believe it, much like Fusion Fall and Club Penguin, there's even a video on YouTube about the final hour of the game while it was online. I'll leave a link for it in the description. The creepypasta itself was very detailed, although that kind of was a requirement since I'm willing to bet almost nobody either knows or remembers this game. To that degree, it kind of hindered the story a bit, as the narrator had to stop at frequent points to either explain things or make things tangible to a reader who had never heard of this game before. I guess you could say that that's a privilege that other gaming creepypastas have, even the bad ones, being that most people usually know what the game is about, and what is or isn't meant to be normal. Despite that, I think the author did an admirable job trying to explain the entirety of the game, as well as what is and isn't supposed to be there. In essence, the creepy factors in the creepypasta stemmed around assets that were left in the game, and discovered in secret means. In other words, they were creepy Easter eggs. And you don't have to search very far on YouTube to find various top 10 lists or icebergs about creepy Easter eggs in video games. And the kicker of it all? The game doesn't exist anymore. It's been taken offline. And unlike Fusion Fall or Club Penguin, as far as I'm aware, there aren't any fan efforts to get servers made for this game. Meaning, it very well could be that this creepypasta is true. Well, I mean it's not true. The story has an author, but I mean, we can prove that it doesn't exist. And in times like these, where online games are getting shut down almost monthly, it can be creepypastas like this that encourage us to keep them alive by exploring. Or at the very least, remember all those unfortunate games that got left behind. Will games like Gotham City Imposters ever come back to life? Probably not. Like I said in the beginning, video game book burning is a very real thing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go petition PlayStation to keep the PlayStation 3 store alive for the rest of my life. Thank you very much for watching or listening to this installment of Kachimuchi's Game and Spooks. Why not do us a kindness and leave a like or a comment, or subscribe. This has been Kachimuchi, and that's about all I have to say about that. Farewell.